The rusted shovel scraped against something that definitely wasn't dirt. Harper Mitchell's heart hammered as she brushed away the mud, revealing ornate metalwork that seemed to shimmer with possibility in the late afternoon sun. Her hands trembled slightly as she cleared more soil, revealing what appeared to be a handle or latch of some kind. Below her knees, buried for nearly a century, lay secrets worth more than she could ever imagine. Secrets that would transform her from the town's pitied city girl with the ghost farm into something extraordinary. But first, she had to survive what came next. The moving truck's engine wheezed to a stop, and Harper Mitchell stared at what was supposed to be her salvation. The farmhouse squatted before her like a wounded animal, its sagging porch roof held up by what appeared to be prayer and spite. Paint peeled from its weathered siding in long, curling strips, and several windows were boarded up with mismatched plywood. The barn behind it leaned so far to one side that it seemed to be bowing in defeat. "Mom," 11-year-old Ethan said from the passenger seat, his voice carefully neutral. "Are we really going to live here?" Harper forced a smile that felt as fragile as the farmhouse looked. "It's going to be an adventure, honey. Think of it as our very own fixer-upper project." Ethan's skeptical expression suggested he'd rather think of it as their very own nightmare. But he kept that observation to himself. Smart kid. He'd already endured enough upheaval. First, the divorce that had torn their family apart when his father decided his executive assistant was more interesting than his wife and son. Then the spectacular failure of Harper's catering business, when her ex-husband's lawyer had frozen their joint accounts mid-bankruptcy. The farmhouse was literally all she had left. Her grandfather Samuel had left it to her when she was 25, and too busy climbing the corporate ladder to care about some old place in the middle of nowhere. Now at 34, broke and desperate, it represented her last chance at stability. The moving men, if you could call two teenagers with a pickup truck moving men, began unloading their meager possessions. Harper watched her life reduced to a dozen boxes and some secondhand furniture, feeling the weight of failure settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. "You the city girl who bought the ghost farm?" Harper turned to find an elderly man watching from the road, his weathered face creased with what might have been amusement or pity. He wore overalls that had seen better decades and a John Deere cap that might have been older than Ethan. "I inherited it," Harper said, walking over to the fence that separated the property from the dusty county road. "I'm Harper Mitchell. Samuel was my grandfather." Sam Mitchell. The man's expression softened slightly. "Good man. Stubborn as a mule, but good. I'm Bill Thompson. Live just down the road. Folks call this the ghost farm because it's been empty so long. Place has been dying slow since Sam passed." "Well, it's not going to die anymore," Harper said with more conviction than she felt. Bill studied her for a moment, taking in her manicured nails, her designer jeans bought in better times, her impractical shoes. "City life treating you rough?" "You could say that." "Land's good," Bill said after a pause. "Sam knew farming. Soil's rich, water table's high. Just needs someone who cares enough to work it." As if summoned by their conversation, a gust of wind rattled the farmhouse's loose shutters and sent a piece of roofing tin clanging to the ground. Bill winced. "Might want to start with the roof," he suggested. "Looks like rain coming." That night, Harper lay on an air mattress in what had once been her grandfather's bedroom, listening to the symphony of a house slowly falling apart. Every creak and groan seemed to whisper warnings. "You can't do this. You're not strong enough. You don't know what you're doing." But mixed in with the doubt was something else, a stubborn determination that she recognized as her grandfather's legacy. Samuel Mitchell had come to this valley with nothing but calloused hands and a dream. He'd built this farm from scratch, raised a family, survived the Depression and 2 wars. If he could do all that, she could certainly fix a leaky roof and plant some vegetables. The rain started at 3:06 a.m. Harper woke to the sound of water dripping. Somewhere in the house, a steady plink, plink, plink that grew more insistent by the minute. She grabbed a flashlight and began hunting for the leak, eventually finding water streaming through a hole in the kitchen ceiling into a growing puddle on the linoleum floor. She positioned a bucket under the leak and stood there in her pajamas, watching the water drip, feeling like the most pathetic person on earth. This was her fresh start. This was how she was going to rebuild her life. "Mom!" Ethan appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Is everything okay?" "Just a little leak," she said, trying to sound casual. "Nothing we can't handle." Ethan looked around the kitchen at the peeling wallpaper, the ancient appliances, the bucket-catching drips, and something shifted in his expression. Instead of the sullen resignation she'd expected, she saw a flicker of determination. "We're really going to fix this place up?" he asked. "We really are." "Okay," he said simply. "Where do we start?" In that moment, something changed between them. For the first time since the divorce, Ethan wasn't looking at her with disappointment or accusation. He was looking at her like she might actually know what she was doing, like they were in this together. Harper felt her throat tighten. "Well, YouTube seems like a good place to start." They started with YouTube videos. For the next week, Harper and Ethan became students of home renovation, watching endless tutorials on roof repair, plumbing, and electrical work. They took notes like their lives depended on it, which in many ways they did. Their first trip to the hardware store was humbling. Harper had expected to spend maybe a few $100s on supplies. The reality check came when she started pricing roofing materials and realized that even the most basic repairs would cost thousands. "First-time homeowner?" asked the clerk, a kind woman named Janet who looked like she'd been working there since the store opened. "First time everything," Harper admitted. "I inherited a farmhouse, and it turns out I inherited a money pit." Janet laughed. "They all are, honey, but there are ways to make it work. You handy at all? I can follow YouTube videos." "That's a start. Tell you what, we've got a customer return section in the back. Perfectly good stuff, just wrong color or slightly damaged. Might stretch your dollar further." That's how Harper discovered the world of salvage and secondhand building materials. What she lacked in money, she made up for in time and determination. She learned to spot good deals at estate sales and construction site dumpsters, with permission, of course. She discovered that many contractors were happy to let her haul away their discards rather than pay disposal fees. Ethan turned out to have an unexpected talent for this treasure-hunting approach to renovation. His keen 11-year-old eyes seemed naturally drawn to possibilities others missed. A stack of mismatched bricks became a charming garden border. Leftover paint from various projects got mixed into surprisingly pleasant custom colors. Old windows with broken panes became the frames for raised garden beds. The townspeople watched their progress with a mixture of skepticism and grudging admiration. Harper had expected hostility, the city outsider moving in, disrupting the status quo. Instead, she found a community that was curious, occasionally helpful, and mostly just hungry for new blood. Mrs. Chen from the general store started setting aside slightly expired produce for Harper's compost pile. The postman, Rick, began leaving packages on the covered part of the porch without being asked, and sometimes included handwritten notes about upcoming weather. Even Bill Thompson started stopping by occasionally, ostensibly to check the fence line, but really to offer unsolicited advice about everything from soil pH to the best time to plant tomatoes. "You're becoming local," he told her one afternoon in late spring, watching her work in the garden she'd carved out of what had been a weed-choked disaster. "Takes most folks years to get the town talking about them in a good way." "I'm not sure anyone's talking about me in a good way," Harper replied, wiping sweat from her forehead and leaving a streak of dirt behind. "Oh, they are. That Mitchell girl's got grit," I heard Martha say at the diner. Coming from Martha, that's high praise. She once called Mother Teresa overly ambitious. "Hey there, listener. Thanks for joining us for Harper and Ethan's story. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment and subscribe to our channel if you love stories about new beginnings and mysterious discoveries. Harper had been working in the garden for 3 months, slowly expanding the plots her grandfather had once tended. The soil was everything Bill had promised, rich and dark, the kind of earth that seemed to grab seeds and pull them toward the light. She'd started small with tomatoes and peppers, herbs and lettuce, but success had made her ambitious. That Saturday morning, she was harvesting the first batch of cherry tomatoes when a sleek black Audi pulled into her driveway. The car seemed obscenely out of place against the backdrop of the weathered farmhouse and rusted farm equipment. A tall man in his late 40s stepped out, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than all the repairs Harper had made so far. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his smile seemed practiced as he approached. "Mrs. Mitchell?" He extended his hand. "Richard Blackwood. I'm a real estate developer based in Chicago. I was hoping to have a word with you about your property." Harper wiped her soil-covered hands on her jeans before shaking his. "It's Ms. Mitchell, and I'm not interested in selling." Richard's smile didn't falter. "You haven't heard my offer yet. The farm isn't for sale at any price. 200,000, twice what this place is worth in its current condition." Harper's heart skipped a beat. $200,000 would solve every financial problem she had. She could start over somewhere else, somewhere with a roof that didn't leak and plumbing that worked properly. She could put Ethan in a good school district, maybe even save for college. But then she glanced at the garden where Ethan was carefully tying up tomato plants, his face alight with pride at their progress. She thought about the nights they'd spent planning renovations, the weekends spent scouring estate sales for materials, the slow but steady transformation from strangers to teammates. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Blackwood, but this is our home." Richard's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I understand sentiment, Miss Mitchell, but be practical. This place is a money pit. Every repair you make will uncover 3 more problems. You're what, a chef? Not a contractor, not a farmer. This lifestyle isn't sustainable for someone like you." "Someone like me? A single mother from the city with no experience in rural living. No offense, but I've seen this story before." "It doesn't end well." Harper felt her cheeks flush with anger. "Thank you for your concern, but we're doing just fine." Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "Think about it. $200,000 could change your life. My offer stands for 1 week." As he turned to leave, he paused, looking around at the property with a calculating gaze. "You know, you don't understand what you're sitting on here. This place has significant historical value. It would be a shame if that history were mishandled." The threat was veiled but unmistakable. After Richard drove away, Harper stood frozen in the driveway, the business card clutched in her hand. What had he meant about historical value? As far as she knew, the farm was just a farm. Old, certainly, but not historically significant. She found Ethan still working in the garden. "Who was that man?" he asked. "Just someone interested in the farm." "Are we going to sell it?" His voice was carefully neutral, but Harper could see the worry in his eyes. "No, honey. This is our home. We're not going anywhere." But Richard Blackwood's visit had planted a seed of unease. That night after Ethan went to bed, Harper began searching through the boxes of her grandfather's possessions that she'd never fully unpacked. There had to be something, some clue about why a Chicago developer would offer twice the market value for a rundown farm in the middle of nowhere. In the bottom of an old trunk, she found a leather-bound journal with her grandfather's name embossed on the cover. The pages were filled with Samuel's neat, precise handwriting, daily records of farm operations spanning decades. But scattered throughout were cryptic references to RW and notations about securing assets and maintaining the trust. Even more puzzling were the technical drawings tucked between the pages, detailed sketches of what looked like underground structures. One was labeled Storage Facility 1923 with measurements and material specifications. It didn't look like any root cellar Harper had ever seen. What exactly had her grandfather been involved in? And what did Richard Blackwood know about it? "Mom, what's this?" Ethan asked the next morning, pointing to the journal open on the kitchen table. "Just some of Grandpa Samuel's old farm records," Harper said, not wanting to worry him with her suspicions. Ethan studied the drawings with interest. "These don't look like farm stuff. They look like blueprints for some kind of bunker or something. Your grandfather was born during the Depression and lived through the Cold War. A lot of people from that generation built fallout shelters." "That's cool." Ethan traced the lines with his finger. "Do you think it's still here somewhere?" Harper hesitated. "I don't know, but maybe we should find out." That's why she was digging in the area behind the barn on a gray Thursday afternoon in June. The area had always been soggy, a low spot where water collected after every rain and turned the ground into a muddy mess. Harper had decided to install a French drain, a simple system she'd learned about from, where else, YouTube. All it required was a trench, some gravel, and perforated pipe. The first 2 feet of digging went smoothly. The soil was soft from recent rain, and her rented trenching shovel cut through it easily. But at about 3 feet down, the shovel rang against something that definitely wasn't dirt or rock. Harper knelt and began digging carefully with her hands, brushing away mud and clay. What emerged was metal, not rusted iron or aluminum, but something darker and heavier. As she cleared more dirt away, she could see it was some kind of hatch or door, maybe 3 feet square with ornate metalwork around the edges. Her heart began to pound. In all the stories her grandfather had told her about the farm, he'd never mentioned anything like this. She cleared more dirt, revealing hinges along one side and what looked like a latch mechanism on the other. "Ethan," she called toward the house, "come here. I need you to see something." Her son came running, still wearing the paint-splattered clothes from their morning work session, refinishing kitchen cabinets. He stopped short when he saw her kneeling beside the rectangular metal door in the ground. "What is it?" he asked, his voice hushed. "I have no idea," Harper admitted. "Help me clear more dirt away." Working together, they exposed the entire hatch. The metal was tarnished but solid, and the decorative scroll work around the edges suggested it was old, maybe very old. Along one edge, barely visible under decades of grime, were etched numbers. 1923. "Mom," Ethan said, "I think this might be important." Harper sat back on her heels, staring at their discovery. Her rational mind supplied perfectly reasonable explanations. It was probably an old root cellar, or maybe a storm shelter. Plenty of farmhouses had hidden storage areas, especially ones built in the early part of the century. But her heart was racing with possibilities that had nothing to do with reason. "Should we open it?" Ethan asked. Harper looked at her son's excited face, then back at the mysterious hatch. Common sense suggested she should call someone, an archaeologist maybe, or at least the historical society. This could be important in ways she didn't understand. On the other hand, it was on her property, and she'd been making decisions based on common sense for years, and look where that had gotten her. A memory flashed through her mind, Richard Blackwood's calculating gaze as he'd surveyed her property. His comment about historical value. Had he known about this? Was this what he was really after? "Let's see what's inside," she said. The latch mechanism was more complex than it had looked at first glance. What she'd taken for simple corrosion turned out to be an intricate lock system, tarnished but still functional. After several minutes of careful manipulation, something clicked and the latch released. The hatch was heavier than expected. Even with both of them pulling, it took considerable effort to lift. And when it finally opened, it revealed a set of stone steps descending into darkness. Cool air wafted up from below, carrying scents of earth and age, and something else. Something that made Harper think of old libraries and forgotten secrets. "It's like a cave," Ethan whispered. Harper pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight feature. The beam revealed that the steps led down about 8 feet to what appeared to be a substantial underground room. The walls looked like stone, and she could make out shapes in the darkness that might have been shelving or furniture. "I'm going down," she said. "Mom, are you sure that's safe?" "Probably not," she admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway. Stay up here and keep watch, okay? If I yell, call 911. The stone steps were solid and well-made, worn smooth by time, but showing no signs of crumbling or instability. As Harper descended, her phone's light began to illuminate the underground room, and what she saw made her gasp. It was a root cellar, but not like any she'd seen in her YouTube research. This was a substantial space, maybe 12 by 15 feet, with arched stone walls and what appeared to be a vaulted ceiling. Along the walls were built-in wooden shelving units, and on those shelves, Harper's light played over dozens of wooden crates, each one carefully labeled with dates and cryptic notations. Most of the dates were from the 1920s, and many of the labels included initials. RWC appeared frequently, along with CMR, and strings of numbers that might have been codes. But it was what sat on the floor in the center of the room that made Harper's knees go weak. A steamer trunk, black leather with brass fittings, sat open as if someone had been interrupted in the middle of examining its contents. And those contents, Harper approached slowly, hardly daring to believe what her eyes were telling her. The trunk was filled with what appeared to be gold coins, hundreds of them, gleaming dully in the light of her phone. Scattered among the coins were bundles of papers tied with ribbon, and what looked like stock certificates or bonds. "Mom?" Ethan's voice drifted down from above. "Are you okay? What do you see?" Harper realized she'd been standing in stunned silence for several minutes. Her hands were shaking as she reached for one of the paper bundles. The documents were in remarkable condition, protected by the cool, dry air of the cellar. The top sheet appeared to be some kind of inventory list written in a careful hand. "Property of R.W. Chambers, CNNW Railroad Holdings, deposited June 15, 1923. Below that was a detailed list of the trunk's contents. 200 double eagle gold pieces, $20,000 denomination. 150 St. Gaudens gold pieces, $15,000 denomination. Railroad bonds, face value $150,000. Whiskey warehouse receipts, Prohibition era, estimated value $125,000. Real estate holdings documentation." The list went on for 2 pages. Harper's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the stone floor. Her phone light wavered as her hands shook, casting dancing shadows on the cellar walls. R.W. Chambers. The name tickled something in her memory, something from her grandfather's stories. Robert William Chambers. That was it. He'd been a railroad man back in the days when the Chicago and Northwestern line had run through the valley. Grandfather had mentioned him occasionally, always with a certain reverence. Chambers had been rich, powerful, important, and apparently he'd hidden a fortune in her grandfather's root cellar. "Mom!" Ethan's voice was more urgent now. "You're scaring me. What's down there?" "I'm okay," Harper called back, though her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. "I'm coming back up. We need to think about this." She took several more photos with her phone, documenting the trunk and its contents. The wooden crates along the walls, the overall layout of the cellar. Then on impulse, she carefully selected one of the gold coins and slipped it into her pocket. The climb back up the stone steps felt like surfacing from a deep dive. Ethan was waiting at the top, his face creased with worry. "What was down there?" he asked. Harper looked at her son, her practical, resilient 11-year-old son, who had already been through too much upheaval in his young life, and made a decision that would change everything. "Buried treasure," she said simply. Ethan's eyes went wide, Real buried treasure? Like pirates? Not pirates, Harper said, sitting down heavily on the edge of the open hatch. But real treasure. Gold coins, old papers, things that might be very valuable. She pulled the coin from her pocket and handed it to Ethan. He turned it over in his palms, studying the eagle design, the date, 1922, the weight of it. Is it real? He whispered. I think so. I think it's all real. They sat in silence for a moment, staring down into the dark opening that had just transformed their lives. Finally, Ethan spoke. What are we going to do? It was the perfect question, practical and profound at the same time. What were they going to do? Harper's first instinct was to call someone. But who? The police? What crime had been committed? The IRS? She didn't even know if treasure found on your own property was taxable. A lawyer? With what money? Richard Blackwood's face flashed through her mind. He knew. Somehow he knew about this treasure, or at least suspected it existed. That's why he'd offered so much for the farm. That's why he'd made that veiled threat about historical value. If she reported the find officially, would he find a way to claim it, to take it from them? First, she said, we're going to close this back up and not tell anyone until we figure out what we're dealing with. Not anyone. Not anyone. This stays between us until we understand what we found and what it means. Ethan nodded solemnly, like a secret mission. Exactly like a secret mission. Working together, they lowered the heavy hatch back into place and began covering it with dirt. Harper was careful to pack the soil down and scatter some loose debris over the area. By the time they were finished, the drainage trench looked like any other construction project temporarily abandoned. As they walked back to the house, Harper felt the weight of the gold coin in her pocket and the even heavier weight of the decision she just made. For better or worse, their lives had just changed forever. The question was whether she could protect her son from whatever came next. Mom, Ethan said as they reached the porch, that man today, the one in the fancy car, he was looking for the treasure, wasn't he? Harper hesitated, then nodded. There was no point in lying to Ethan. They were in this together now. I think so, honey, which means we need to be very careful. Ethan's expression turned serious. We won't let him take it from us. This is our farm now, our treasure. Harper wrapped her arm around her son's shoulders, struck by how quickly he'd shifted from being her responsibility to being her partner. That's right. Our treasure, our future. She just hoped it was a future they'd survive to enjoy. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Harper sat at her laptop, researching everything she could find about Robert William Chambers, Prohibition-era investments, and treasure trove laws. What she discovered kept her up until 3 a.m. and left her alternately elated and terrified. Robert William Chambers had indeed been a railroad baron in the early 1900s, with holdings throughout the Midwest. He made a fortune in the post-Civil War expansion, investing in everything from railroad construction to grain elevators to whiskey distilleries. According to several historical sources, he disappeared mysteriously in 1924, along with a substantial portion of his liquid assets. Various theories had been proposed over the years: embezzlement, murder, a deliberate vanishing act to avoid prosecution, but no definitive answer had ever been found. More importantly, from Harper's perspective, the legal research suggested that treasure found on your own property was indeed yours to keep, though it would likely be subject to income tax as found property. The potential value, based on her rough inventory and current gold prices, could be substantial, possibly life-changing substantial. But there was a catch, and it was a big one. Historical treasures often attracted attention from people who claim rights to them: descendants of the original owner, creditors, government entities, historians, museums. All might have legitimate or semi-legitimate claims on Chambers' hidden fortune. And once word got out that such a treasure existed, Harper and Ethan could find themselves fighting legal battles they couldn't afford against people with much deeper pockets. She needed help, but she needed the right kind of help. The next morning over breakfast, Harper watched Ethan carefully. He was unusually quiet, pushing his cereal around the bowl more than eating it. "What's on your mind, buddy?" she asked. Ethan looked up, his expression serious beyond his years. "Are we rich now?" Harper hesitated. "It's complicated. The treasure is valuable, yes, but we can't just spend it. There are laws about these things and people who might try to take it from us. Like that man? Mr. Blackwood? Maybe. I'm not sure exactly what he knows." She reached across the table and took his hand. "What I do know is that we need to be careful. We need to figure out the right thing to do." "What if—" Ethan paused, brow furrowed. "What if we just kept it secret? It's on our land. Grandpa Samuel must have known about it, right? So it's kind of like our inheritance." The simplicity of his logic was tempting. Maybe they could just quietly sell a few coins here and there, using the money to fix up the farm, pay for Ethan's college, build a secure future. No one would need to know. But Harper shook her head. "I wish it were that simple, but hiding something this big would be wrong, and probably impossible. Secrets like this have a way of getting out, and when they do, we'd be in even more trouble. So what are we going to do?" Harper took a deep breath. "I think we need to talk to someone who understands the historical significance of what we found. Someone who can help us navigate the legal issues." "Who?" The answer came to Harper suddenly. "Dr. Lauren Powell." Harper had met Dr. Powell at the library during one of her early visits to town. Lauren Powell was retired from a career as a museum curator, sharp as a tack and passionate about local history. More importantly, she was trustworthy and discreet, the kind of person who understood that some discoveries needed to be handled carefully. Harper called Dr. Powell that afternoon. "I found something on the farm," she said without preamble when Dr. Powell answered. "Something historical. I need someone I can trust to help me understand what I'm dealing with." There was a pause, then Dr. Powell said, "How historical are we talking? Native American artifacts? Civil War era? Early settlement?" 1920s. And Dr. Powell, "It's big." Another pause. "I can be there in an hour." Dr. Lauren Powell arrived in a dusty Honda Civic that looked like it had been places and seen things. She was a small woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and the kind of sturdy shoes that suggested she was prepared for anything. Harper led her to the backyard where Ethan was waiting beside the covered hatch. They'd agreed he could be present for the revelation. After all, he was part of this now, whether Harper liked it or not. "Before I show you what we found," Harper said, "I need you to promise me something. Whatever this is, whatever it means, I need your word that you'll help us handle it the right way. Not the way that benefits historians or museums or anyone else, but the right way for us, my family." Dr. Bieber, Powell studied Harper's face for a moment. "You're scared." "I'm terrified," Harper admitted. "We finally found something good, and I'm terrified that it's going to be taken away from us." "Fair enough," Dr. Powell said. "You have my word. Now show me what's got you so spooked." Together they uncovered and opened the hatch. Dr. Powell descended the stone steps with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades exploring historical sites. And Harper heard her gasp of amazement echo up from the cellar. When Dr. Powell emerged 20 minutes later, her face was flushed with excitement and something that might have been awe. "Harper," she said carefully, "do you have any idea what you found?" "Robert Chambers' treasure. Robert Chambers' life insurance policy," Dr. Powell corrected. "And possibly the answer to one of our region's greatest historical mysteries. That cellar isn't just a hiding place. It's a time capsule. Those documents down there could rewrite the history books about the railroad era and prohibition in this area." Dr. Powell sat down heavily on an overturned bucket, looking like she needed a moment to process what she'd seen. The question, she continued, is what you want to do about it. Because once word of this gets out, and it will get out eventually, your quiet life is going to become very complicated. How complicated? Ethan asked. He'd been uncharacteristically quiet during Dr. Powell's exploration, but Harper could see the wheels turning in his head. Dr. Powell looked at him seriously. Complicated enough that you might have reporters camping in your front yard. Complicated enough that you might get phone calls from people claiming to be Robert Chambers' great-great-grandchildren. Complicated enough that lawyers might start sending you letters about legal rights to historical artifacts. Harper felt her stomach drop. So we can't keep it. I didn't say that, Dr. Powell said quickly, but you need to be smart about how you handle it. There are ways to protect yourself and your claim while still doing the right thing historically. But it requires planning and the right kind of help. What kind of help? Dr. Powell was quiet for a moment, obviously thinking through options. Finally, she said, there's a model for this kind of situation. It's called a heritage trust partnership. Essentially, you maintain ownership of the property and the treasure, but you partner with a historical organization to authenticate, preserve, and display the findings. You get financial benefit. The historical community gets access for research and education, and everyone's interests are protected. That sounds too good to be true, Harper said. It's not easy, Dr. Powell admitted, but it's been done successfully before. And in your case, there are some factors that work in your favor. The property is legitimately yours. The treasure was found entirely on your land, and you've been careful not to disturb the historical context. Plus, you're willing to work with historians rather than trying to cash out and run. Ethan had been listening intently to this conversation, and now he spoke up. Would we get to keep living here? More than that, Dr. Powell said. If this works the way I think it could, you'd be able to restore this farm properly and maybe even make a living from it. Heritage tourism is big business when it's done right. People would pay to see the Chambers cache, to hear the story, to learn about Prohibition-era history. You could develop educational programs, host school groups, maybe even offer historical reenactments. Harper tried to imagine the farmhouse restored to its former glory. Tour buses pulling up the driveway. Ethan growing up with a sense of pride in their family's legacy rather than shame about their reduced circumstances. What's the catch? She asked. Because there was always a catch. The catch is that it takes time to set up properly, and you can't keep this completely secret while you're doing it. You'll need to bring in experts, archaeologists, appraisers, legal advisors, possibly federal authorities if any of Chambers' activities cross state lines. Each person you bring in increases the risk that word leaks out before you're ready. Dr. Powell stood up and dusted off her hands. But I think I know how to minimize that risk. There's a professor at the State University, Dr. Michael Bennett, who specializes in Prohibition-era history. He's worked on several high-profile discoveries, and he understands the legal complexities. More importantly, he's trustworthy and discreet. If anyone can help you navigate this properly, it's him. Harper looked down at the covered hatch, then at Ethan, who was watching her with the kind of trust that made her heart ache. Her son believed she would make the right decision, that she would somehow turn this impossible situation into something good for both of them. Okay, she said finally, let's call Dr. Bennett. Dr. Michael Bennett arrived 3 days later, driving a battered pickup truck and wearing clothes that suggested he was more comfortable in the field than in the classroom. He was younger than Harper had expected, maybe early 40s, with graying hair and the kind of deep tan that came from spending summers at archaeological sites. Dr. Powell had briefed him over the phone, but Harper could see his excitement building as he descended into the cellar and began examining the Chambers cache. He spent nearly 2 hours below ground, occasionally calling up requests for better lighting or asking Harper to take photographs from specific angles. When he finally emerged, his eyes were shining with the kind of enthusiasm that reminded Harper why she'd once loved research in her corporate life. "This is remarkable," he said, settling onto the back porch steps with a bottle of water. "Not just the treasure itself, but the context. Everything's been perfectly preserved, and the documentation is extraordinary. Those papers tell the story of a sophisticated financial operation that involved railroad funds, Prohibition-era investments, and what appears to have been a very elaborate exit strategy." "Exit strategy?" Harper asked. "Chambers didn't disappear mysteriously," Dr. Bennett explained. "He planned his departure very carefully. Based on what I saw down there, he converted a substantial portion of his assets into portable wealth. Gold, bonds, commodity receipts that could be redeemed anywhere. The cellar was his insurance policy, a backup plan in case something went wrong with his primary escape route. But something did go wrong," Dr. Powell said. "He never came back for it." "Exactly. And that makes this find historically significant in ways that go far beyond its monetary value. This cash represents a complete snapshot of how wealthy individuals prepared for economic uncertainty during one of the most turbulent periods in American history." Ethan, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. "Does that mean we get to keep it?" Dr. Bennett smiled. "That's the question, isn't it? From a legal standpoint, your mother's position is very strong. The treasure was found entirely on her property, which she owns free and clear. There's no evidence of any crime in the original concealment, and any statute of limitations would have expired decades ago." "But," Harper prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice, "but there will be challenges. Chambers had business partners, creditors, possibly descendants who might argue they have claims. There could be tax implications, both historical and current. And once this becomes public knowledge, you'll face pressure from museums, collectors, and publicity seekers." Dr. Bennett leaned forward, his expression serious. "However, Dr. Powell's idea about a heritage trust partnership is brilliant. If we can set it up properly, you'll have legal protection, professional support, and financial benefit while preserving the historical integrity of the find." "How much financial benefit are we talking about?" Harper asked, feeling slightly guilty for being so blunt about money, but needing to understand the practical implications. "Conservatively, based on current gold prices and the face value of the bonds and commodity receipts, you're looking at somewhere between $8 and $12 million. But that's just the immediate value. If the Heritage Partnership works, if you can develop this into a legitimate tourist destination and educational center, the long-term value could be much higher." Harper felt the world spin slightly. 8 to 12 million, more money than she'd ever dreamed of having. Enough to restore the farm, secure Ethan's future, maybe even help other people in situations like hers. "What do we do next?" she asked. "If you're enjoying Harper and Ethan's treasure journey so far, what do you think they should do with their discovery? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the conclusion to this incredible story." The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of careful, discreet activity. Dr. Bennett assembled a team of trusted experts, a historical archaeologist, a Prohibition-era specialist, a legal advisor who understood treasure trove law, and a financial planner who specialized in sudden wealth situations. Each team member was bound by strict confidentiality agreements, and all work was conducted with the understanding that Harper retained full control over any decisions about the treasure's future. The archaeological documentation alone took 2 weeks. Every item in the cellar was photographed, cataloged, and carefully preserved. The historical analysis revealed details that fascinated even Dr. Bennett. Chambers hadn't just been hiding money. He'd been documenting a complex web of Prohibition-era business relationships that included some of the most prominent families in the region. The legal review was equally enlightening. Harper's ownership of the treasure was indeed solid, but the lawyers identified several potential challenges that needed to be addressed proactively. Most could be handled through proper documentation and insurance, but a few required more creative solutions. That's when Dr. Powell's Heritage Trust idea proved its worth. Rather than trying to handle every legal and logistical challenge on her own, Harper could partner with an established historical organization that already had experience with complex artifact ownership issues. The trust would provide legal protection, professional management, and educational programming while ensuring that Harper and Ethan retain both ownership and financial benefit. The organization Dr. Powell had in mind was the Midwest Heritage Foundation, a well-respected group that managed several historical sites throughout the region. They had experience with treasure discoveries, relationships with relevant government agencies, and most importantly, a track record of successful partnerships with private landowners. Harper met with the foundation's director, Dr. Rachel Chen, on a rainy Thursday morning in July. Dr. Chen was a small, intense woman who listened to the story of the Chamber's cache with the kind of focused attention that suggested she understood exactly what they were dealing with. This is the kind of discovery we dream about, Dr. Chen admitted after reviewing the documentation Dr. Bennett's team had prepared. Not just because of its monetary value, but because of its historical significance. This cache could anchor a major educational initiative about Prohibition-era economics and the social history of the Upper Midwest. What would that look like practically? Harper asked. Dr. Chen pulled out a tablet and began showing Harper examples of similar heritage partnerships. The basic model is straightforward. You retain ownership of the property and the treasure, but you lease the heritage rights to the foundation for a term of years, typically 25 to 30. We handle all the legal, logistical, and educational aspects. You receive an upfront payment for the lease rights, plus a percentage of ongoing revenue from admissions, educational programs, and related activities. The numbers Dr. Chen outlined were staggering. An initial lease payment of $5 million, plus ongoing revenue that could easily reach several $100,000 annually once the site was fully developed. And we get to stay on the farm? Harper asked. More than that, Dr. Chen said. You'd be the site manager, essentially. This is your family's legacy, your grandfather's property. No one else could tell the story with the same authenticity and passion. We'd want you to be the face of the heritage site. Harper tried to imagine herself giving tours to busloads of history enthusiasts, telling the story of Robert Chambers' treasure and her grandfather's farm. It seemed surreal, but also somehow right. There's one more thing, Dr. Chen continued. Because of the historical significance of this discovery, the foundation could probably secure federal and state grants for site development and programming. That means we could restore your farmhouse and barn to period-appropriate condition, develop professional quality exhibits, and create educational materials, all without reducing your financial benefit. It sounded perfect, too perfect, and Harper had learned to be suspicious of perfect. I need time to think about this, she said, and to discuss it with Ethan. Of course, Dr. Chen said. This is a life-changing decision. Take all the time you need. That evening, Harper sat on the front porch with Ethan, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and amber. They'd been living on the farm for 4 months now, and it was beginning to feel like home in ways she hadn't expected. So what do you think? She asked her son. Should we become treasure hunters turned heritage site managers? Ethan was quiet for a moment, throwing a stick for the farm dog they'd recently adopted, a stray who decided their chicken coop needed guarding. Will there be a lot of people coming to visit? Probably. Would that bother you? I don't know, Ethan said honestly. Maybe it would be cool, like having our own museum. It would be a big change from the quiet life we've been living. Ethan looked around the farm, at the garden they'd planted, the barn they'd been slowly repairing, the chicken coop he'd helped to build. Mom, do you remember what you said when we first got here? About how Grandpa Samuel built this place from nothing. I remember. Well, we're kind of doing the same thing, aren't we? We came here with nothing, and we're building something good. Harper felt tears prick her eyes. Her son, who'd been through a divorce and a bankruptcy and a cross-state move, who'd spent the summer learning to fix leaky roofs and plant vegetables, had just summarized their situation with more wisdom than most adults could muster. Yeah, honey, she said, we are building something good. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. A black SUV was pulling into their driveway, moving too fast and stopping with a spray of stones. Harper stood up, instinctively moving in front of Ethan. Go inside, she whispered. But Mom? Now, Ethan. The car door opened, and Richard Blackwood stepped out. He wasn't alone. A tall, official-looking man in a sheriff's uniform followed him. Ms. Mitchell, Blackwood called, his voice falsely cheerful. I hope we're not interrupting your evening. Harper forced herself to remain calm. What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwood? I believe you've met Sheriff Davis. He has some questions about recent activity on your property. The sheriff nodded curtly. Ma'am, we've received reports of unauthorized excavation of potentially significant historical artifacts. Mind if we take a look around? Harper's heart raced. How did they know? Who had talked? I do mind, actually, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. This is private property. If you have specific concerns, I'd be happy to address them with my lawyer present. Sheriff Davis's expression hardened. Ma'am, I can get a warrant if necessary. Then I suggest you do that, Harper said. Until then, I'll have to ask you both to leave. Blackwood stepped forward, his smile now a barely disguised sneer. You're making a mistake, Ms. Mitchell. I know what you found, and I know you've been talking to the Midwest Heritage Foundation. Did they tell you about their connection to the Chambers estate? Did they mention that I sit on their board of directors? Harper felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Dr. Chen hadn't mentioned any connection to Blackwood. Was this whole heritage partnership just an elaborate scheme to get control of the treasure? You're trespassing, she said, reaching for her phone. Leave now, or I'm calling the state police. Something flashed across Blackwood's face. Anger, frustration, calculation. Then he nodded to the sheriff, and they both retreated to the SUV. This isn't over, Blackwood called as they drove away. That treasure has a rightful owner. And it isn't you. Harper's hands were shaking as she dialed Dr. Powell's number. We have a problem, she said when the historian answered. Richard Blackwood just showed up with the sheriff. He knows about the treasure, and he claims he's connected to the Midwest Heritage Foundation. That's impossible, Dr. Powell said. I've worked with the foundation for years. Blackwood has no official role there. Then how does he know about our discussions with them? And why is the sheriff helping him? Dr. Powell was silent for a moment. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. In the meantime, don't talk to anyone else about this. Not Dr. Bennett, not Dr. Chen, no one. I'll be right over. Harper hung up and turned to find Ethan standing in the doorway. From his expression, she knew he'd heard everything. Is he going to take our treasure? Ethan asked, his voice small. Harper wrapped her arms around him. No, honey, I won't let that happen. But we need to be even more careful now. Why is he doing this? It's our farm, our treasure. Some people think the rules don't apply to them, Harper said. People like Richard Blackwood are used to getting what they want, and they don't care who they hurt in the process. Ethan's expression turned serious. Like Dad. The simple comparison hit Harper like a physical blow. Her ex-husband had been exactly like that. Entitled, manipulative, willing to sacrifice others' well-being for his own gain. And she had sworn she would never let anyone treat them that way again. Yes, she said, like your father. And just like with him, we're going to stand our ground. As darkness fell, Harper kept watch by the window while Ethan dozed on the couch. Dr. Powell had arrived and was making calls from the kitchen, her voice low and urgent. A soft noise from outside caught Harper's attention, a rustling in the bushes near the barn. She peered through the window but couldn't see anything in the darkness. Just wind, probably. Or an animal. Then she saw it, a brief flash of light moving toward the area where the hatch was hidden. "Someone's out there," she whispered to Dr. Powell. "Buy the cash." Dr. Powell joined her at the window. "Call Bill," she said, "then the state police. I'll get Ethan ready to leave if we need to." Harper's fingers shook as she dialed Bill Thompson's number. The old farmer answered on the second ring. "Bill, it's Harper Mitchell. I think someone's trying to break into my property. Can you come over? And bring your shotgun." "On my way," Bill said without hesitation. 5 minutes. Next, she called the state police, reporting a potential break-in. They promised to send a trooper, but it would take at least 20 minutes for them to reach the remote farm. Through the window, Harper could now make out two figures moving near the barn, their flashlights bobbing in the darkness. Were they trying to find the hatch, or had they already found it? Bill's truck roared into the driveway, headlights blazing. The figures by the barn scattered, running toward a vehicle parked on the road. Bill fired a warning shot into the air, but the intruders were already speeding away. "You all right?" Bill asked when Harper opened the door. "We're fine, but I think they were looking for something we found on the property." Bill's weathered face was grim. "Blackwood's men, I reckon. He's been asking around town about your grandfather, about the history of this place." Harper made a decision. Bill Thompson had been nothing but kind to them since they arrived. If anyone deserved to know the truth, it was him. "Bill, there's something I need to show you." An hour later, they were all seated around Harper's kitchen table. Harper, Ethan, Dr. Powell, and Bill. The state police had come and gone, taking a report but finding little evidence of the intruders beyond some footprints near the barn. "So that's why Blackwood's so interested in your place," Bill said, shaking his head in wonder after Harper had explained about the Chambers cash. "Always knew Sam was keeping secrets, but nothing like this." "Did you know my grandfather well?" Harper asked. Bill's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Known him my whole life. Our dads were friends, and then we were. Sam was the most honest man I ever met, except when it came to Robert Chambers. Whenever that name came up, Sam would get quiet, change the subject." "Do you know anything about their relationship?" Dr. Powell asked. Bill hesitated. "Not much. Only that Sam wasn't always just a farmer. Before he bought this place, he worked for the railroad, Chambers Railroad. There were rumors back when I was a boy that Sam had been more than an employee, that he'd been Chambers' right-hand man, maybe even his friend." Harper leaned forward. "Is there anything else you remember? Anything that might help us understand why Chambers left his fortune in my grandfather's care?" Bill was quiet for a long moment, as if sorting through old memories. "There was something. A story my father told me once about how Sam saved Chambers' life during a labor dispute. Workers were striking, things got violent. Someone pulled a gun on Chambers and Sam jumped in front, took the bullet himself." "Grandpa was shot?" Ethan asked, wide-eyed. "That's the story. Recovered, obviously, but left him with a limp. Never complained about it, though. Just said he'd done what needed doing." Harper tried to reconcile this image of her grandfather, heroic, self-sacrificing, with the quiet man she remembered. The one who'd taught her to fish, who'd patiently explained the cycles of planting and harvest, who'd never once mentioned that he'd been shot saving a millionaire's life. "If that's true," Dr. Powell said, "it explains a lot. Chambers would have felt indebted to Samuel. The cash might have been his way of ensuring Samuel was taken care of, a repayment of a life debt." "But why didn't Grandpa ever use it?" Harper asked. "He lived simply his whole life. There were times when the farm was struggling. Why not use some of that gold?" Bill shrugged. "That was Sam. A promise was a promise. If Chambers asked him to keep that treasure safe, he'd have done it to his dying day." A thought occurred to Harper suddenly. Bill, the cache has been hidden for almost 100 years. How could Blackwood possibly know about it? Did someone in town talk? Not likely. Most folks didn't even know Chambers and Sam had a connection. So how did Blackwood find out? Dr. Powell looked troubled. That's what I've been trying to figure out. I made some calls. Blackwood isn't on the Midwest Heritage Foundation board, but his company did make a large donation last year. That might have given him access to their research database, including any information about Chambers. But that still doesn't explain how he connected Chambers to this farm, to my grandfather, Harper said. Bill cleared his throat. There might be one explanation. Land records. If Blackwood was researching Chambers' real estate holdings, he might have found a connection. Chambers bought a lot of property around here back in the day, including this farm, Harper finished, realization dawning. Chambers originally owned this land, didn't he? And he sold or gave it to my grandfather. Bill nodded. That's how I heard it. Sam never talked about it much. But my father told me Chambers practically gave him this place for a song after the shooting incident. Everything was starting to make sense. Blackwood had been researching Chambers, found the connection to Samuel Mitchell, and somehow concluded that the missing Chambers fortune might be hidden here. That's why he'd offered to buy the farm at an inflated price. When Harper refused, he'd resorted to more aggressive tactics. Dr. Powell's phone rang, breaking the tense silence. She stepped into the living room to answer it, returning moments later with a grim expression. That was Dr. Bennett. Someone broke into his office at the university tonight. They took all his research notes on the Chambers cache. Harper felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. How did they even know about his involvement? I don't know, but it gets worse. The university's security cameras caught the break-in. One of the thieves was wearing a sheriff's department jacket. Sheriff Davis, Harper whispered. He's working with Blackwood. Dr. Powell nodded. Which means we can't count on local law enforcement for protection. And if they have Bennett's notes, they know exactly what's in that cellar and exactly how valuable it is. What do we do now? Ethan asked, his voice small. Bill Thompson stood up, his weathered face set with determination. First, you're not staying here tonight. It's not safe. You'll come to my place. I've got a guest room and a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous. And second, Dr. Powell added, we need to move the most critical documentation from the cache. If Blackwood gets his hands on those papers, he could use them to challenge your ownership. Harper looked at Ethan, seeing the fear in his eyes, but also a stubborn resolve that mirrored her own. They had come too far to give up now. Okay, she said, let's do it. But we need to hurry. I have a feeling Blackwood won't wait long to make his next move. As they prepared to venture out to the cellar under cover of darkness, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that they were approaching a point of no return. What had started as an incredible discovery was rapidly becoming a dangerous game with stakes higher than she'd ever imagined. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that perhaps some treasures were never meant to be found. Under the cover of darkness, Harper, Bill, and Dr. Powell worked swiftly to retrieve the most critical documents from the Chambers cache. They carefully selected the ownership papers, Robert Chambers' personal letters to Samuel, and several ledgers documenting the original acquisition of the gold. Everything else would have to remain underground. There was simply no way to move an entire steamer trunk of gold coins without being noticed. We should be able to secure these at the State Historical Society's vault, Dr. Powell whispered as they sealed the documents in waterproof containers. I have colleagues there who can be trusted. Ethan stood watch at the farmhouse, tasked with flashing the porch light twice if any vehicles approached. As they finished securing the last of the documents, the signal came. Someone's coming, Harper hissed. Quick, close it up. They lowered the hatch and hastily scattered dirt over it, but there wasn't time to conceal it completely. The sound of an approaching vehicle grew louder. This way, Bill said, gesturing toward a line of dense bushes at the edge of the property. "Stay low." They ducked into the undergrowth just as headlights swept across the yard. A black SUV pulled up, and three men stepped out. Even in the darkness, Harper recognized Richard Blackwood's silhouette. The other two men carried flashlights and what looked like metal detectors. "It's around here somewhere," Blackwood was saying. "The survey maps show an underground structure behind the barn." "What if the Mitchell woman catches us?" one of the men asked. "She won't. Sheriff Davis made sure she's been called away on a false emergency. Something about her son getting into trouble at a friend's house." Harper's blood ran cold. If they'd called her with a story about Ethan being in trouble, she would have rushed out without a second thought. Only Ethan's presence at the farm had prevented their plan from working. "Let's move," Dr. Powell whispered. "We need to get these documents safely away before they find us." Carefully, they crawled through the bushes, making their way toward Bill's truck, which was parked down the road out of sight. Harper glanced back at the farmhouse, seeing Ethan's silhouette in the window. "Stay inside," she willed him silently. "Please, stay inside." As they reached Bill's truck, a shout came from the direction of the barn. "I found something! Over here!" "We need to go now," Bill said, starting the engine. "We can't help the boy if we're caught." Harper hesitated, torn between securing the documents and protecting her son. "I can't leave Ethan." "I'll stay with him," Dr. Powell said firmly. "You go with Bill and get these papers somewhere safe. Then call the state police, not the sheriff's department. Tell them there are armed trespassers on your property." Before Harper could argue, Dr. Powell was already heading back toward the house, keeping to the shadows. Bill put the truck in gear and pulled away slowly, lights off, until they were well down the road. "She'll keep him safe," Bill reassured her, turning onto the main highway. "Lauren Powell's tougher than she looks. Served in the Army before she became a historian. Your boy's in good hands." Harper nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. "Where are we going?" "I've got a friend in Madison, attorney named Evelyn Carter, specializes in historical property disputes. If anyone can help us protect what's rightfully yours, it's her." The 3-hour drive to Madison was the longest of Harper's life. Every mile that took her farther from Ethan felt wrong, but she knew securing the documents was their best hope of protecting the treasure and their future. When they finally reached Evelyn Carter's office, it was nearly midnight. Despite the hour, Carter, a sharp-eyed African-American woman in her early 40s, greeted them with alert professionalism. "Bill's explained the situation," she said, examining the documents they'd brought. "You've got a complicated case here, Ms. Mitchell, but not a hopeless one." "What can we do?" Harper asked. "Blackwood has connections, money, even the local sheriff in his pocket." "What he doesn't have is legal standing," Carter replied. "Based on these documents, Robert Chambers explicitly gifted both the land and anything found on it to your grandfather. His intentions are clear, and any court would recognize that." "So why is Blackwood so confident he can take it from us?" Carter's expression turned grim. "Because people like Blackwood don't play by the rules. They use intimidation, manipulation, and their connections to get what they want. But that's where we have an advantage. We can expose him." She pulled out a legal pad and began writing. "First, we need to file for an emergency injunction preventing anyone from accessing or removing artifacts from your property. Second, we need to alert the FBI's art crime team. They handle cases involving valuable historical artifacts. And third, we need to find out exactly who Blackwood is and why he's so interested in the Chambers' fortune." "I might be able to help with that last part," a voice said from the doorway. Harper turned to see a tall, elegant woman in her 70s standing in the entrance to the office. Her silver hair was pulled back in a chignon, and despite the late hour, she was impeccably dressed. "Eleanor Chambers Wright," the woman said, extending her hand. "And I believe you found my grandfather's missing fortune." Eleanor Chambers Wright was not what Harper had expected. Far from being a greedy heir determined to claim the treasure, She was a retired history professor with a keen interest in setting the record straight about her family's legacy. Richard Blackwood approached me 6 months ago, Eleanor explained as they sat in Carter's conference room. He claimed to be a historical researcher interested in my grandfather's business dealings. I shared what family records I had, photographs, letters, some business documents. It wasn't until later that I discovered he'd been looking for the lost fortune all along. "How did you find us?" Harper asked. "Dr. Powell called me. We've corresponded for years about my grandfather's disappearance. When she realized what you'd found, she thought I should know." Harper tensed. "Are you here to claim the treasure?" Eleanor smiled gently. "My dear, I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. What interests me is the truth. For nearly a century, my family has lived under the shadow of my grandfather's disappearance. Some said he was a thief who absconded with his investors' money. Others claimed he was murdered. I want to know what really happened." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a leather portfolio. "And I believe these might help us understand." Inside were documents Harper hadn't seen before. Private letters between Chambers and Samuel Mitchell dating back to 1920, photographs of the two men together, and most significantly, a handwritten will dated January 1924, just months before Chambers' disappearance. "My grandfather left everything to your grandfather," Eleanor said simply. "The official will that was executed after his disappearance left his assets to his wife and children. But this earlier document makes it clear that he intended the hidden cash to go to Samuel Mitchell in the event of his death or disappearance." Evelyn Carter examined the will with professional interest. "This changes everything. With this document and the papers you recovered from the cellar, we can establish a clear chain of ownership from Chambers to Samuel Mitchell to you, Ms. Mitchell." "But what about Blackwood? How does he fit into all this?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "That's where things get interesting. Richard Blackwood's real name is Richard Whitmore. His great-grandfather was Charles Whitmore, my grandfather's former business partner, and the man many suspected of being involved in his disappearance. The pieces were starting to come together. So Blackwood, Whitmore, believes the treasure should have gone to his family all along." "Exactly. The Whitmores lost everything in the Depression. They've harbored a grudge against my family for generations, claiming my grandfather cheated them before he vanished. If Richard discovered evidence suggesting the missing fortune was hidden on your farm, he'd stop at nothing to get it," Harper finished. "We need to act quickly," Carter said, already reaching for her phone. "I'll file for the emergency injunction first thing in the morning. In the meantime, we should alert the state police that Blackwood is trespassing on your property with potentially criminal intent." Harper's thoughts immediately went to Ethan. "I need to get back to the farm. My son is there." "I'll drive you," Bill offered. "We can be back by dawn." Eleanor placed a hand on Harper's arm. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to come too. I've waited a lifetime to see my grandfather's legacy. And perhaps together we can put this family feud to rest once and for all. Are you on the edge of your seat? What do you think will happen when they return to the farm? Share your predictions in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories like this one." When they arrived back at the farm the next morning, they found the place surrounded by state police vehicles. Harper's heart lurched at the sight, but Bill laid a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Look there," he said, pointing to the porch where Dr. Powell sat with Ethan, both of them apparently unharmed. Harper was out of the car before it fully stopped, rushing to embrace her son. "Are you okay? What happened?" Ethan's face was alight with excitement. "We caught them, Mom. Dr. Powell called the state police, and they caught Blackwood and his men trying to dig up the cellar." Dr. Powell looked exhausted but satisfied. "Once the police verified they were trespassing and had no legal right to be here, they took them into custody. Sheriff Davis showed up too, trying to intervene, but the state officers weren't having any of it. They're questioning him now about his involvement." A state police captain approached. introducing himself as Captain Reynolds. Miss Mitchell, we've secured your property and detained 3 trespassers. One of them claims to have a legal interest in historical artifacts on your land. He's lying, Harper said firmly. I have documentation proving my ownership, and I've just filed for an emergency injunction to protect the site. She gestured to Eleanor. This is Eleanor Chambers Wright, the actual granddaughter of Robert Chambers, and she supports my claim. Eleanor stepped forward with dignity. Captain, my grandfather entrusted his legacy to Samuel Mitchell, Ms. Mitchell's grandfather. I have his will and other supporting documents that make his intentions clear. Richard Blackwood, or Whitmore, as he was born, has no legal claim whatsoever. Captain Reynolds looked between them. Ma'am, this is sounding like a civil matter that will need to be settled in court. For now, we'll maintain a presence on the property to ensure no one disturbs any potential historical artifacts until a judge can review the situation. As the captain walked away, Eleanor turned to Harper. I'd very much like to see the cellar, if you wouldn't mind. I've spent my life wondering what happened to my grandfather. Perhaps there are answers down there. Harper hesitated, then nodded. Of course, it's your heritage too. Together, they made their way to the half-exposed hatch behind the barn. The police had cordoned off the area, but after checking their identification, allowed them to pass. Harper opened the hatch, and for the second time, descended into Robert Chambers' secret cache. This time with the cellar illuminated by proper lights the police had set up. The full extent of the treasure was even more impressive. Eleanor moved slowly through the space, touching the shelves her grandfather had filled, examining the crates with his handwriting, tears glistening in her eyes. He prepared so carefully, she murmured. But why? What was he running from? In the corner of the room, partially hidden behind one of the shelves, Dr. Powell discovered a small metal box they hadn't noticed before. It was locked, but the key was taped to the underside, a simple security measure likely meant to deter casual discovery. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a sealed letter addressed to Samuel Mitchell, to be opened only in the event of my death. I think this belongs to both of you, Dr. Powell said, handing the items to Harper and Eleanor. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened the letter while Harper held the journal. My dear Samuel, Eleanor read aloud, if you are reading this, then I have either perished or been forced to disappear permanently. The so-called accidents at the rail yard were no accidents at all. Whitmore has discovered my investigation into his embezzlement scheme and has made threats against my family. Rather than risk their safety, I have chosen to disappear, establishing a new identity far from Chicago. Eleanor paused, her voice choked with emotion. The treasure I have entrusted to your care represents the honest portion of my fortune, money that belongs rightfully to me, not to the company or its shareholders. I leave it to you with a clear conscience, as payment for both your loyalty and the life debt I owe you. Use it as you see fit, whether that means keeping it safe for my eventual return or claiming it as your own if I cannot come back. The journal contained detailed evidence of Charles Whitmore's crimes, embezzlement, fraud, even sabotage that had caused the deaths of several railroad workers. Chambers had been gathering evidence to expose him when he realized his own life was in danger. So that's why he disappeared, Eleanor said softly. Not because he was a criminal, but because he was trying to bring one to justice. And my grandfather kept his secret all these years, Harper added, even when it would have made his life so much easier to use the gold. Eleanor closed the journal with reverence, a promise kept for almost a century. Your grandfather was a remarkable man, Ms. Mitchell. Please call me Harper. Harper, Eleanor smiled. I believe our families have been connected long enough to be on a first-name basis. The legal battle that followed was briefer than anyone expected. Once the FBI's art crime team became involved and examined the evidence, Richard Blackwood's claims quickly fell apart. The discovery of Chambers' journal and letter, combined with Eleanor's support of Harper's ownership, created an ironclad case. Within weeks, the court had issued a permanent injunction preventing Blackwood from making any further claims on the treasure. Sheriff Davis resigned in disgrace when his collaboration with Blackwood came to light. An investigation revealed he'd accepted substantial bribes to help Blackwood gain access to the property and intimidate Harper into selling. As for the treasure itself, the Heritage Trust partnership Dr. Powell had suggested proved to be the perfect solution. With Eleanor's blessing, Harper entered into an agreement with the Midwest Heritage Foundation to preserve and display the Chambers cache as a historical exhibit. The terms were even better than Dr. Chen had initially proposed. A $5 million upfront payment for the heritage rights, plus 20% of all future revenue from admissions and educational programs. Harper would serve as the site's director, telling the remarkable story of Robert Chambers, Samuel Mitchell, and the treasure that connected them. Most importantly, the farm itself would be restored to its original 1920s condition, creating an immersive historical experience for visitors while providing Harper and Ethan with a beautiful home. "It's more than I ever dreamed possible," Harper told Dr. Powell as they stood on the porch, watching construction crews begin the restoration work. "When we came here, I was just hoping for a roof that didn't leak. Now we're building a legacy." "You were building a legacy from the moment you decided not to give up," Dr. Powell replied. "The treasure just gave you the resources to do it on a grander scale." Ethan had embraced their new reality with enthusiasm, appointing himself junior historian and spending hours researching Prohibition-era history. The local school had even granted him special credit for his work documenting the artifacts in the cellar. Eleanor became a frequent visitor to the farm, working alongside Harper to develop educational materials about her grandfather's life and times. The two women discovered they had much in common beyond their connected family histories: a love of gardening, a passion for preservation, and a determination to set the record straight. 1 year to the day after Harper and Ethan had arrived at the dilapidated farmhouse, they held the grand opening of the Chambers Mitchell Heritage Farm. Visitors lined up along the county road, eager to see the legendary treasure and hear the remarkable story of its discovery. The farmhouse gleamed with fresh paint, its porch rebuilt, its windows restored to their original glory. The barn had been transformed into a visitor center with exhibits about Prohibition-era economics and railroad history, and the cellar itself was now accessible via a specially designed viewing platform that allowed visitors to see the treasure exactly as Harper had found it. "You did it, Mom," Ethan said as they prepared to cut the ribbon for the opening ceremony. "You saved us." Harper looked at her son, taller now, more confident, his eyes bright with pride and possibility. "We did it together, honey, just like Grandpa Samuel and Robert Chambers. Some partnerships are just meant to be." As visitors streamed onto the property, Harper found herself standing next to Bill Thompson, who was decked out in period-appropriate overalls for the occasion. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "Sam would be proud, not just of all this," he gestured to the beautifully restored property, "but of you, the way you stood your ground, protected what was yours." "I had help," Harper said. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dr. Powell, Eleanor." "That's how it works," Bill said simply. "No one makes it alone." Sam knew that. That's why he and Chambers stuck together, even after all those years. Loyalty matters. As Harper led the first tour group through the property, recounting the story of the hidden treasure and the friendship that protected it for nearly a century, she felt a sense of completion she'd never expected to find when she'd arrived broken and desperate a year earlier. The treasure had changed their circumstances, certainly. But the real transformation had come from within, from the courage to start over, the willingness to work hard, the ability to trust others when trust seemed foolish. That evening, After the last visitors had departed and the cleanup crews had gone home, Harper and Ethan sat on the front porch watching fireflies rise from the fields as darkness settled over the valley. Eleanor had joined them, along with Dr. Powell and Bill, all of them savoring the quiet after the excitement of the day. "Mom," Ethan said, breaking the companionable silence, "what do you think Grandpa Samuel would say if he could see all this?" Harper considered the question, looking out over the farm that had been in her family for generations. The land her grandfather had worked with his own hands, the secret he had kept faithfully for a friend. "I think he'd say we found the real treasure," she replied softly. "The gold?" Ethan asked. "No, honey. This." She gestured to the people gathered on the porch, to the beautifully restored home, to the land stretching away into the gathering darkness. "The connections we make, the stories we keep alive, the way we take care of each other and the things that matter." Eleanor nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My grandfather spent his life accumulating wealth, only to discover in the end that what truly mattered was protecting the people he loved. I think he'd be pleased to see how his legacy has brought our families together again after all these years." As stars began to appear overhead, Harper felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. 1 year ago, she'd stood in the same spot, watching rain drip through the leaky roof, wondering how she would ever rebuild their lives. Now the farm was restored, their future secure, and their lives enriched by new friendships and purpose. The rusted shovel that had scraped against that mysterious metal hatch now hung on the wall of the visitor center, a humble tool that had uncovered an extraordinary treasure. But Harper understood now what her grandfather had known all along. The real treasures weren't buried in the ground. They were found in kept promises, in hard work, in new beginnings, and in the courage to believe that even the most broken things could be made beautiful again. "Come on," she said, rising from her chair. "I've got fresh apple pie in the kitchen and ice cream in the freezer. Some treasures are meant to be shared." As they gathered around the kitchen table, this unlikely family forged by history and happenstance, Harper knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as Samuel Mitchell and Robert Chambers had done nearly a century before. Some legacies, after all, were measured not in gold, but in the lives they touched and the stories they inspired. And by that measure, Harper Mitchell and her son had become rich beyond imagining.